Welcome back. We hear the same thing after every mass shooting. Don't politicize a tragedy. Don't even talk about what to do to at least make them happen less often as families are burying their loved ones. Well, it has been 9 days since a gunman using a semi-automatic weapon to murder 26 people while they worshiped in a church in Texas. It has been a month and a half since a gunman using several semi-automatic weapons killed 58 people enjoying a country music concert in Las Vegas. It was the deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history. We are on to other things now, folks. A crazy race for the U.S. Senate in Alabama. And by the way, did you hear President Trump got the Chinese not to jail a couple of knucklehead basketball players from UCLA who stole some Louis Vuitton sunglasses in China? In other words, it is time to talk. And joining us is Christian Ziegler, Sarasota Republican State Committee man, Susan Smith, the president of the Democratic Progressive Caucus of Florida, and Jacob Ogles, politics editor of SRQ Magazine, who, by the way, covered the Pulse massacre in Orlando. Thank you all. So, Christian, let's start with you. The mass shootings. What would Christian Ziegler do about it?
Well, obviously you're seeing members of the left, they're jumping to gun control, and that's what they're pushing. You know, in my mind, when you look at this, I mean, if you look at just the facts when it comes to, you know, assault rifles, as people call them, and gun ownership, and, you know, the way crime has happened, and even mass shootings, if you just look at mass shootings, there's no direct correlation with it going up recently at some drastic scale. You know, my personal opinion is I think that this is getting covered a lot more because we have 24/7 news. I think it's also a morality problem where, you know, we have issues in our country with broken families and other morals that are taking a hit that we need to really be focused on improving.
Well, I mean, 50 some odd people, 20 some odd people being killed in a mass shooting is going to be covered. It's not because we have CNN and Fox and MSNBC.
No, it's going to be those obviously those are major events and those are going to be covered. I'm talking about on the nightly news we hear shooting after shooting after shooting, whereas before when we had the big three, ABC, CBS, NBC, you didn't really get the nonstop coverage 24/7 on,
but
you know,
it
violence.
is a fact. Is it, if it not, that we have more mass shootings in the United States of America than any other country in the world?
Than any other country in the world. But okay, so you're pointing at other countries. Again, we have a morality problem, I think, in the United States. I mean, if we look at our broken homes and the divorce rate in the United States compared to other countries, that's also very high. So I think that that's really where a lot of the problem stems. But if you look at just mass shootings in the United States, before the assault rifles ban that happened in the 90s, it was 18 a year, which mass shootings, 4 people or more shot. Then during the ban, it was 19 a year, so it went up. And then after the ban, I think it went to 20, 21 a year. So it's not some huge increase, and the ban really did nothing to prevent it.
Susan, did the ban do anything?
I think we've actually had 400 this year, so it's gone up quite a bit. There is mass carnage in this country, and it's time we do something about it.
Do what?
I'm not politicizing it, I'm personalizing it. I'm a survivor of gun violence. We lost our nephew in 2009 because the police are under attack. They never know when somebody's going to be armed. They have to assume now that people are armed, where 30, 40 years ago, you didn't assume that every person walking down the street had a gun. So we're living in perilous times if we don't put some sensible gun regulations in place. Nobody wants to take away your gun. What we want to do is put some sensible restrictions. The bump stocks are a perfect example. There is a bill in the legislature that hasn't even been committed yet that could already be through 1 or 2 committees if Greg Stubbe and Ross Spano from Hillsborough would
There's
put
a
them on
lot
the
to
calendar.
there's a lot to unpack there.
Yes.
Jacob, you covered the Pulse nightclub shooting. Yes. I mean, that also, a mass shooting like that in a club. We didn't see that decades ago when you and I were growing up.
Well, and I think that to Christian's point about the number of mass shootings, I think one thing that gets ignored when you look at counting shootings themselves is you need to look at the casualty count. You know, this shooting in Texas just knocked Columbine out of the top 10 of the deadliest most shootings. It's something, when you look in Orlando, you had a large number of people killed, not just injured, but killed. Something like 1 in 6 of the people who were in the club that night ended up losing their life.
Right.
That's the thing, is the power of the weapons.
We are just getting warmed up, and we'll have much more on this, what to do about mass shootings, right after we check the first alert weather, so stay with us. Welcome back, folks. It has been 9 days since the latest mass shooting in America. We have waited a couple of days. So, folks, what, if anything, do you want to do to try to make these tragedies happen, maybe at least less often? Joining us right now is Christian Ziegler, Sarasota Republican State Committeeman, Susan Smith, President of the Democratic Progressive Caucus of Florida, and Jacob Ogles, Politics Editor of SRQ Magazine, who covered the Pulse Massacre shooting. So, Christian, let's boil down what you would support and what you would not support. You gave us some statistics about the assault weapons ban, but let me ask you directly. Should Americans be allowed to own assault-style weapons, semi-automatic weapons, and should they allowed to have magazines that have unlimited capacity?
So what do you define as assault-style weapon?
You tell me.
Well, I mean, that's the question
we
is...
do know AR-15s were used in both Texas and in Las Vegas.
Okay, so when you look at like an assault-style weapon, which is a term that is made up that's really to try to paint these rifles as negative in a way as you can. And all it is they put a pistol grip on a semi-automatic rifle. Semi-automatic rifles are hunting rifles. So what do we say? Well, guns without a pistol grip, you have to ban. No one really can figure that out. But since they're painted black, should we ban them? I mean,
well, let's narrow it down.
Yep.
A weapon that has the capability of holding a magazine that has anywhere from 10 to 100
But
rounds.
see, and here we go. We're focused on the weapon and we're not focused on the individual. I'll tell you, like for the AR, you want to ask me what would I support and what would I oppose? I would oppose banning, quote unquote, assault-style rifles. I don't think that's going to do anything. And not to mention Stephen Williford. I mean, we haven't even talked about him. He hasn't really been talked about in the media that much outside of a couple days. This is an individual that lived across the street from the church. He was an NRA firearms instructor, and he grabbed his AR, went outside, and he stopped that shooting. And he wouldn't have been able to stop it unless he had an assault rifle.
Stop it.
No, well, we don't know, right? Because that person was the shooter was going. Hold on, let me finish.
If everybody were an NRA instructor, I might not have a problem with the proliferation of guns, but everybody's not. And
so the NRA does some good then? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying somebody that's trained with a weapon is one thing.
Okay, so the NRA does some. So back to what I was going to finish.
Now,
is this individual was? Hold on, let me finish.
It's an NRA talking point. That all the things you're saying are NRA.
No, it's a fact. Stephen Williford was at his house. Let's just get the facts out there because a lot of people don't know this. And if you actually know what the facts were, the shooter was in the church. He came back out to his car. They don't know if he was planning on leaving or reloading, but he had extra guns. He had extra ammo in his car. And that's when Stephen Williford grabbed his AR, went outside, and he shot that individual, which caused him to flee.
Jacob.
That's what happened. Facts.
When it comes to NRA training, there are differences in terms of classroom and on-site training, and I believe the NRA offers online training, and there's been some criticism that kind of training is not really, you don't know who you're training and you don't know how good the training is.
Well, I do think it's important to separate, though, the operational side of the NRA that's providing instruction, that's certifying people to work at target ranges, and the political arm of the NRA. Of course, I'm not even certain that it's fair to totally throw all this on the NRA, which is an advocacy organization. I think the amount of influence that they levy, particularly with their grading system, isn't necessarily a flaw with the organization as much as it's a flaw with the way the elected officials respond to the lobbying.
Susan, let me get you again to talk about what the point that Christian was bringing up, that it's not the weapon or the rounds, it is whoever is using it is at fault here. React to it.
Well, they love to argue terminology. The other side, the pro-gun, pro-violence people is what I like to call them.
Second Amendment.
No, well, I'm pro-safety. That's my position. Well, the Second Amendment doesn't give you the right to any kind of gun, any place, anywhere, under any circumstance.
Which is why I'm okay with grenade launchers being banned.
So that's what we've come to. That's our compromise point, is grenade launchers we can agree on.
No,
That
fully auto
is-
rifles, they're banned.
Okay,
That's fine.
okay.
All right, let me ask.
So let me correct
Okay,
something first.
sure.
I said 400, that was 400 casualties from mass shootings, I think, this year. But there are 7 children a day that die because of weapons, mostly because they're in their homes. The guns are in the homes. 62% of the gun deaths are not homicides. They're not a scary person coming to your house that you have to protect your family from. They're suicides. They're people who have easy access to guns, and it's a permanent solution to a temporary condition, and we need to figure out what to do with that. But the NRA and the lobby, the gun lobby is what the NRA is, and they're not even willing to talk about it.
All right, let me bring up another issue that is a tough issue, and that's how to deal with people who have mental illness and their access to guns. Because on one hand, whether you are supportive of the Second Amendment or pro NRA or against it, a lot of people talk about, well, let's just keep away guns from the mentally ill. The problem is that butts up against people who are supportive of civil rights, because the vast majority of people who are mentally ill are not adjudicated mentally ill, and therefore there's no legal basis to restrict their ownership.
Right. So we also don't fund mental health, so people can't even see a doctor. It's my understanding that the shooter in Texas had tried to see a psychiatrist and was trying to get money from friends because he knew something was wrong, and but he couldn't get the help he needed. So we've got, we need a comprehensive solution. Just doing one thing won't help. Just banning grenade launchers is not going to help us stop those 7 children a day from dying.
Christian, let me ask you this. Would you be willing to look at a system or a method that bans people who have mental illness, who may not be Baker acted or adjudicated from owning a firearm?
That's a tough issue because, like you mentioned, I mean, you start infringing on individuals' rights, and obviously, no one wants someone that's totally crazy running around with any kind of weapon, whether it's a gun or anything else. But I don't believe that additional laws are going to prevent what's happening right now. If you look at the national database, this is something I actually talked to an individual that owns a gun shop, and the national database that we have should have caught this individual in Texas. But what happened was the Air Force, there was a lapse there. There was a failure there. So we have laws in place that would have prevented this, may not even prevented this, but it may have prevented him from actually buying a gun, that are in place that failed us. Those laws failed us. And he still carried out the shooting. Excuse me?
Should they have stopped him? Do you think that there should be a law in place that should have stopped that individual?
Well, it's already in place that he was convicted of domestic violence. He should have been flagged. The Air Force dropped the ball and didn't put him into the national database, and then that didn't notify anyone that he shouldn't be buying guns.
What about the Las Vegas
So that's a
shooter? Why didn't they have? If we had had records, we would have known about these purchases he was making and the ammunition he was buying.
A purchase isn't against the law. Domestic violence
And
is.
that's
So
that's
where you
exactly
start
the
running into
point.
an issue.
That's exactly my point.
Christian, hold on one second.
Yeah.
And Jacob, I have a question for you as well. Shouldn't it be a red flag of an individual who is buying, whether you call it assault weapons or large capacity magazines, to the degree that most people wouldn't buy them and don't need them, that in and of itself, should that be a red flag?
No. The Second Amendment is clear that we have a right to bear arms. It doesn't have any stipulations in there. And when you start talking about should it be a red flag, why aren't we talking about the First Amendment? There's a lot of people that say a lot of crazy stuff that ends up turning into violence. And why don't we say, well, you can't say these words or that word?
Jacob, that leads me to my next question. We talk about this, we argue about this, and nothing gets done. It doesn't get done in the Florida legislature or in the United States Congress. And is the reality that we're facing simply that, and a couple weeks, couple months, another year goes by, and the same thing will happen again?
Well, that's one of the frustrating things about the notion that we should never have these conversations too close to shootings, because shootings are coming with smaller intervals all the time. But also, even when we have conversations, I think when we're talking about how some of these shooters shouldn't have been able to get guns according to the law anyway, it's ignoring that we have active things put in place to stop these databases from being cross-referenced properly. We have a lot of things that just aren't getting shared, and if you can't even enforce the laws that we've agreed on enacting, that's a huge problem.
All right, we have to take another quick break, but we'll be back for final thoughts when we return. And our guests join us right now for final thoughts. So I'm going to ask you all similar questions. Susan, I'll start with you. If you could do one thing to make these mass shootings happen less frequently, what would that be?
Elect a leader that has the courage to force the issue somehow and to force the conversation. We don't have national leadership on this issue.
But if there was one thing you could do away with or one policy that you would support, what would that be?
Probably the, well, I can't say just one. I would do better background checks, universal background checks, which actually 82% of gun owners agree with.
Okay, Christian, if there was one thing you could do to make these mass shootings happen less often than they do, what would that be?
Not give the killers so much attention, and then but on the flip side, have the government and all the authorities really dive into why did they do this? What were their motives of the individual?
The FBI and the,
I mean, look, Stephen Paddock, we're a month out.
We have limited the National Institutes of Health from researching.
But look, Alan,
question.
This is, even this discussion, like we're sitting here talking about guns, we're a month out after that shooting in Las Vegas, a month and a half, and no one's talking about Stephen Paddock and what was his motive, what drove him to do this. Everyone immediately jumps to what guns can we ban, and I think that does a disservice, and we don't jump in. Is it mental health? Maybe so. Then we have a debate on that, right? But we don't have debates on that. We're talking about banning all these rifles, and you know, rifles that weren't even used in the shooting is what we're talking about.
I don't have the ability to do a mental health deep dive into that man, and I don't even know his name. You know his name, so you're reading more about him than I am. So
yeah,
I don't even know who
why he did it. And there's no information.
Well, there's no information yet. We don't know what they're investigating.
Because we're not
Jacob,
demanding it. That's the problem.
From your experience covering what happened in Orlando Pulse and your other reporting on this, what's the one thing you would like to see that we're not doing?
Something. And I know that may sound overly vague, but the problem right now is this conversation is being stopped dead in its tracks. There's no other issue where people are unwilling to try laws that are experimental, to explore things that you can do. We've had very little motion on gun control in the state of Florida and most of the South, certainly, for the past 16 years.
Unfortunately, we have to leave it right there. But before we go, we want to hear what some of you had to say about last night's show on retail shopping. This can be a difficult time for retail stores. Shoppers sit at home and shop online instead of fighting the crowds at the mall. We went to Facebook to ask you how you prefer to shop. And Craig says, yes, online prices are cheaper in some cases. I would like everyone that shops online to think about losing that personal shopping experience that can translate to a great day of shopping. Dave says, malls are teenage hangouts. I am no longer a teenager, so no, I'll shop online, thank you. And Christine says, what hurts downtown businesses is the city's parking requirements. I just received a ticket 2 weeks ago while I was in a hair salon. Needless to say, that salon just lost my business. Businesses need the city design programs to attract, not deter customers. Well, if you'd like to join the conversation on tonight's topic, and I just totally suspect that some of you might, just visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/mysuncoast.com.abc7. And FYI, you can watch past discussions on demand. They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. And a reminder, you can get all the latest local and national news on your smartphone app. But if you are an Apple iOS user and have been told that the old version of our app will no longer be here at the end of the month, the app will automatically update for Android users. But all iPhone users, you can find the new app by searching on the App Store for My Suncoast in the App Store. Well, we want to thank our guests for a really spirited conversation. Christian Ziegler, the Sarasota Republican State Committee man, Susan Smith, the president of the Democratic Progressive Caucus of Florida, and Jacob Ogles, the politics editor of SRQ Magazine.